Ready?
It's hard to turn it upside down and say, did it really solve the problem? That is a good question, and it is thankfully my core responsibility here at Ocado.
Hi guys, back for another episode of the Techne Connect Behind the Robot podcast, joined by a very special guest, Steve Payling, VP of Product at Ocado Technology.
Hey, nice to be here.
How you doing, Steve?
I'm okay, thanks.
Good stuff, good stuff. First off, I'd like you to introduce a little bit more about yourself, give a brief summary, maybe a little bit more about Ocado, what your role's like and what you're actually responsible for.
Okay, well maybe I'll start with Ocado. It's a long storied history, but I'll start from as close to the beginning as I can get. So obviously Ocado, some people will know about, is a grocery company, or was a grocery company at least in its infancy. And it did that really well, and only that really well, for the first half of its existence basically. Over time though, that business in its early days was basically supported by other third-party technology, right? We used stuff that was already on the shelf and then stuff that we'd built ourselves and put it all together to try and power that first generation of the business. But to become kind of more profitable, more innovative, serve customers more effectively, highly accurate order fulfillment and so on, we found there was loads of problems in the grocery space. It's quite hard to build very large baskets, right? It's very different to, say, the Amazon challenge, where you might be picking 1 or 2 items for a customer. Here you're picking like 50 items, north of 50 items in some cases, across different temperature regimes. You've got like ambient goods, chilled goods, frozen goods. That brings a whole set of challenges. And when you're doing that at scale, you may be doing thousands and thousands of those orders a day. Suddenly data and automation become pretty critical problems to solve, right? Or at least opportunities to solve problems. So out of that, I think Ocado Technology was kind of born, which is where I work now. But yeah, joined as a personal shopper, and I absolutely fell in love with the place, like almost instantly. Walked into the warehouse on my first day, saw all of this like conveyors and cranes everywhere, and people running around with trolleys and carts and PPT trucks and you name it. Didn't really understand how it all hung together, right? It just looked like a bit of chaos, if I'm being frank with you. But it wasn't chaos. Under the hood, it was actually quite sophisticated, but still very early in the days of making it really laser focused and really efficient. I was actually asked to join the tech team after being kind of first line support, I suppose, for our earlier solution. And ever since then, I've been working with the technology and product teams on trying to build the best logistics automation platform in the world, basically. And we now use that platform to serve some of the biggest retailers in grocery.
I think your journey into retail was a little bit different than mine. It was a lot more back-facing, where I was working in kind of the internal customer-facing fashion world of Top Man. Oh, so it's yeah. So is that kind of different? It's a lot more kind of easier to work on the back end, where it's not directly customer-facing. It's more kind of operational and strategic. I'm guessing it's a lot easier when you've not got an angry customer shouting in your face. Before we get too far into the tech, what's a typical day look like for yourself?
I don't think I properly actually described my role. So I'm the vice president of the product here, right? So I look after quite a broad estate within the Ocado Technology team. It's about half of the overall investment that we make in technology. And we actually build, design and ship warehouses as part of our platform, as well as a lot of other things, software and so on, that power the end-to-end platform. But inside our warehouses, it provides essentially a facility to receive, pick and pack and dispatch fully prepared customer orders into neatly positioned bags in customer totes that go out onto vans and so on. And inside that warehouse, we have what we call Hive, which is essentially a storage solution. On top of that Hive, we've got bots running around. This is like very sophisticated 3D printed chassis bots that are flying around on this grid, controlled by what you could sort of surmise as a flight control system. There might be up to 1,000 bots running around on any one grid at any one time, and we might have 2 grids in any one warehouse, the ambient and the chill, or in the freezer as well. So there's quite a lot of sophisticated tech in there. And equally, the picking and packing side of things is not all done by people. Some of it's done by robots and suction cups and all that kind of stuff, machine vision and being very precise with placing and putting down customers' items. So yeah, it can be a really, really varied kind of set of challenges that I might face into on any given day. But ultimately, I'm the leader of quite a large group of people, so I spend a lot of time on leadership-related activities, whether it's communication, it's strategy, or it's linking goals to the things we're doing day to day, making sure people really understand the why and what's really important to us. But then it can also be, governance level reviews. Where are we with investing in X or Y outcome, and are we going fast enough or not fast enough, and things like that. So yeah.
What do you do outside of work? What keeps you grounded beyond just Ocado?
Yeah, look, I'm definitely, people would say of me, I think I'm a man of many hobbies. I think that's a fair statement. I have quite a lot of other stuff to keep my feet on the floor. Pretty interested in just, general fitness and stuff like that. And to be honest with you, totally addicted to CrossFit. That is a huge thing in my life. I love CrossFit. I play musical instruments. I've got young kids as well. They're 9 twin boys, and they're obviously getting to an age now where they're learning loads of new skills and interested in things like robotics and stuff like that as well. So there's loads of all that kind of stuff to keep me busy.
I guess, do you think there's any kind of habits or routines that you've got yourself into to help you deal with the fast pacedness and scale of your actual role?
So definitely metrics driven dashboard kind of approaches to progress. I like to see a dashboard that tells us this is where we are with X, or how a CFC or a site around the world is performing, or whatever it is. And I quite like to look at those at the start of the week and kind of on a Monday just check in and make sure everything's okay and there's nothing I need to worry about. And then I can kind of go on to what's my important and urgent things that I need to kind of focus on.
What was your educational background like, and I guess what was your career path from leaving education to obviously where you are now?
Well, I mean, like people who are maybe mathematically minded, I studied maths, physics, and math and the sciences, so biology, chemistry, and physics, and music as well, by the way, as a sort of tangent topic. But maths was really where I was most comfortable, and I found my way into astrophysics through my amazing physics teacher. I had an absolutely phenomenal physics teacher who I still feel very fondly of. He was a great guy. And people who recognise some nascent abilities in people, they push you in a certain direction if you're malleable enough. And I guess I was, and he definitely encouraged me to go in that direction. As I say, I studied astrophysics. I didn't really have a plan, though. That is the truth of it. It was more a case of I can do it, therefore I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. I was never really like a career-driven or ambition in that way person when I was a younger man. But obviously things change as you get older and you get responsibilities and all this other stuff. So, that's kind of what stabilised me a bit more into the world I was in. I found myself in a company that was very supportive of people that come from maybe diverse backgrounds, or from maybe not from technology roles into technology roles. Ocado is definitely a sort of company that will all comers are welcome, and if there's a role for you and you can add value, then they welcome that, and I've been very lucky to be in that position.
Nice, very, very similar career path to myself, to be honest, from leaving university. Absolutely zero plan, decided to jump into bar hopping with jobs. But then when you find the company that's right for you, where it is like that inclusive mentality and everyone's kind of a working cog in a machine driving to the same destination, I guess you've kind of found your place then, haven't you? Yeah. And it's a nice feeling when you do find that.
Yeah, I mean, Ocado's, in my opinion anyway, a high trust, high autonomy type of company, right? It puts a lot, especially where people clearly have the potential and the ability. Ocado will put a lot of faith and trust in those people to kind of own things all the way through to the end, and it doesn't matter what level you are, right? You could be a very junior person or a very senior person. It really doesn't matter, and I love that. The culture here is quite inclusive that way.
Obviously, there's going to be a lot of big decisions in leadership positions like the ones that you're in. I guess, is there any that you think you've made that have really shaped where you are now, or at least kind of
decisions I've made or that the business has made?
Big decisions that you've had to make that have helped get to where you are now.
For me personally, I think I was encouraged by a lot of good leaders actually to be myself at all times, right? Try to be as comfortable as you can in your own skin, because when you can be that way and you can be yourself, I think you're unfiltered and unblocked by worrying about other things. Your mind is a bit more clear, at least it is for me anyway. And I had a fantastic mentor at that time who really encouraged me to really voice my views on things, and really sort of like, if you really think it and you can back it up with data, then go for it. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of moments or opportunities in the past where I didn't do that, where I didn't say, I know what we need to do next, right? The next thing we need to fix is this because. And through that process of kind of having this, kind of support, I guess, through the people around me at the time, I started to get a bit braver and actually write stuff down. Yeah. Right? I started to say, okay, well, here's a problem I've seen. And here's a way I think we can solve that problem, and this is why I think it's worth solving this problem versus maybe doing some other stuff. And this is kind of how I ended up slowly kind of falling into a product management role, because I didn't really even know what product management was when I first started this role. But the mindset's there of, there's a problem, is it worth solving? How much do you think it might cost to solve it? Is it worth solving against all these other things?
I guess looking at your time in automation, I'm keen to kind of delve into any key milestones or achievements that you're proud of. Do you think I guess the question at heart is, do you think there's anything groundbreaking that you've worked on?
I think for me, there's probably a couple of things that I could look back to and think that was pretty cool, and definitely has been transformational for us in a lot of ways. So one of the big challenges in grocery is packing efficiently, right? Packing customer shopping in the store is done by the customer or by the checkout tillier person. And they can use as many bags as they like, really, because they're in the store, they can take the bags out to their car. And as long as they can carry them or put them in a trolley, it's kind of fine, right? Obviously, there's the plastic waste element of that we should obviously consider. But it is really a live decision, is the point. Whereas when you're planning to pick thousands of customers' orders all at once, and you need to get those orders onto vehicles to their houses at an agreed, essentially contractual window. You tell the customer you're going to have your shopping between this hour and that, or this minute and this minute. We need to be able to be almost ruthless in the packing efficiency to make sure we can fill these vans as efficiently as possible, but also maintain the quality you'd expect for if you're doing it yourself or a cashier was doing it. So I was involved in our cubing, we call it cubing, but it's essentially 3D bin packing. It's algorithmic. It's not as much automation as you think, but it affects automation in quite an interesting way. So basically minimizing the amount of bags and tote space that we use, being the crates that we deliver the items in, trying to minimize the amount of space that we need to get customers' items to be as densely packed as possible, but also maintain quality, does have quite an interesting knock-on impact to automation. Because the less efficient that is, effectively the more automation you need, because you need to move more stuff. You need to move more physical boxes. The box sizes don't change because they're made of plastic, and it's quite hard to, unless you come up with a clever crate, which we haven't done yet. But yeah, so I was involved in kind of trying to reason about that problem, but it's a computationally difficult problem, right? So being able to find the best, quote unquote, best answer to what things to put together into a customer's bag to save as much space as possible and therefore be able to reuse that space or to fill it up to a certain point. Doing that once for one order, pretty simple, right? Most I guess computer science and data science graduates will have done that at some point within their time at university. But doing that at scale across thousands and thousands of customers was a huge challenge. Yeah. And I was involved in that, and I think that's probably when we did it. It was probably the first time that you'd see that kind of problem being solved in that way. The 3D bin packing problem at mass scale, and we had to think very creatively about how to kind of go about that to make sure we didn't essentially waste lots of CPU time and stuff like that, right? To try and get it to be a fast and efficient process that can operationally execute here's the solution we're going to give you to then go and pack efficiently in the warehouse.
I could have had a better solution for you though. I could have just asked my mum to do it because she's been teaching me how to pack these shopping bags for the last 20 odd years. I still do them incorrectly, but she's got a really efficient process of doing it apparently.
When I was working on that project all those years ago, that was something that I could not stop thinking about. I would go into actually go and do it in a store, and I ended up really testing myself to go, is it really right? And then I'd go and do it in our warehouse. Is it really? Yeah. Because obviously algorithmically you can come up with lots of clever things, but it's hard to turn it upside down and say, did it really solve the problem? So yeah, just going and testing it in the real world. Is this actually possible to pick that thing? Because you might go, oh, here's a perfect order, but is it really achievable for a picker to pick them? You've got to remember, grocery products, there's a lot of different ones, different shapes and sizes, bags, cartons, you name it, plastic bottles, cardboard, etc. So it is a hell of a problem to solve, even just for a person using their intuition. And nowadays we're trying to do that with robots and vision systems, right? And that is a whole other kettle of fish, because you've got that same kind of intuition challenge of, can I actually pick this thing up and put it where it's supposed to go? And also, if I do it in that order, can I unpick it if it's wrong?
I think that kind of taking yourself out of the technology side and going and looking at the real use case application in the outside world is so important to being able to understand the product as well. Yeah. I was speaking to a guy over in the US who their robot basically paints the outside of buildings or cleans the outside of buildings on the windows and the outside. And to get into the headspace of what the robot actually does and the problem that they're solving, he decided to go and work for free at car washes for a week. So that ingraining yourself in the outside world of what your product is actually.
Feel the pain of the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong, is they have this really smart and inventive technology, this new gen technology that is cool, but it doesn't solve a real world problem. Yeah. Exactly. How do you build a business around technology that is just cool? In my opinion, I don't think you can. But I think that's what a lot of people where they miss the trick is working out what that real life application problem solving is for. I guess I'm going to try and flip it on its head now and ask you to look a bit inward on reflection. You know, during your time in automation and robotics, do you think there's any lessons that you've learned, or what lessons stand out, I guess?
Can happen in almost any company, in my opinion, is you can get kind of a little bit obsessed with the solution and not with the problem. And maybe suffer a little bit from optimism bias, right? You're really optimistic, you really think you can make it happen, and you keep going and keep going and keep going. Now, that is a lesson I've learned for sure, is to really check yourself and make sure you've got people around you. Particularly, it's valuable to have skeptics, because skeptics keep you honest, and they give you a good check to go, actually, do they have a point? So that's something that I've learned to include in our thinking, right, is to really overweight and overvalue the skeptical opinion, because it puts to the test your theory much more effectively than you just believing yourself.
Almost having a purposeful devil's advocate, I guess.
Something like that, yeah, exactly. And so I definitely encourage that kind of discourse in our product groups. And if somebody does have a view that is counter to the hypothesis, is to test that. Okay, well, are they right? Let's prove it right or wrong either way. But yeah, being really open to critique and inviting feedback, I think, is massive when it comes to automation and robotics, because you can kind of just, you've done it a certain way before. It's going to work that way this time. Might not, just might not.
I guess, do you think there's any kind of common mistakes that engineers and product managers make when they're building for automation?
I mean, as with any building of anything, there's traps and pitfalls along the way. I already mentioned one around optimism bias, and that can kind of maybe sometimes lead you down the wrong road. Hopefully you've got good agile feedback loops that kind of catch you quickly, fail fast and learn fast type stuff. That is quite hard to do in automation, I think, especially when you're building more like mechanical type things, because it essentially needs physical kit. If you're building software systems to control solutions, that's probably a bit easier to include fast feedback loops. Not having rigorous testing is definitely a watch out for and a gotcha. We in Ocado tend to lead with a simulation first approach to everything we do, whether that be simulating the control system for an entire warehouse or the entire warehouse in of itself, but then filling in all the gaps as well. So each individual piece of machinery, each individual robotic solution, we simulate those typically before we even think about building them. And then that starts our prototype thinking, is, well, how can we now prove that simulation, right? Yeah. But the control and the logistics and the kind of algorithms that we might want to test, we've already kind of had to think about that in a safer environment, basically. Because obviously if you get it wrong in a simulation, it's no big deal. Yeah. If you get it wrong in the real world, you've got to spend a lot of money on building the thing. It can be quite painful, yeah, exactly. So rigorous testing approaches and thinking about a test-driven or simulation-driven, particularly for hardware and automation approach, I think I would say is not necessarily a lesson, but it is a lesson, is just a good approach. And if you don't do that, it might catch you out later.
I think it's something that does come up quite often, is with leadership in robotics, they're talking about test, especially because when it gets into the customer's hands, they're going to find problems that you yourself hasn't. This is more for the kind of hardware side or consumer products, but when they get into the customer's hands, they're going to find problems that you haven't even thought of.
Oh, it's like the amazing meme. I don't know if you've ever seen the QA tester meme where they've got the square, all the different shapes, the square, the diamond, the circle.
Yeah.
This is a square, and they're putting the circle through the square hole, and it's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's that, right, in the real world, and it does happen, obviously. You can't test for absolutely every eventuality. It'd be too expensive and really cost prohibitive. But to do that with a simulation-based approach means you can test a heck of a lot more than you could if you didn't have it. Because especially now as well, with the modern tech moving the way it is, the data inputs to simulation used to be relatively manual, or they'd be things that you would configure, or it'd be an algorithm that might generate some inputs. But obviously tech's moving quite quickly, and using Gen AI, for example, to generate your sample data, well, it can generate millions and millions of different versions of sample data, and it can put loads of different chaos and variation in there that probably would have been a bit harder to do in the past. So I definitely lean heavily on the side of test it.
Yeah. I completely agree. Again, on the self-reflection side, I'd like you to imagine that you're 18-year-old Steve, you're 21-year-old Steve.
Probably better.
You're just jumping into robotics and automation. Do you think there's any advice that you'd give to younger Steve before stepping into the industry?
What advice would I give to 21-year-old Steve? I think it's the same advice I'd give to actually anybody. I don't think it's really age dependent. Technology is and always will be a bit of a moving feast, right? It will continuously self-improve, especially more and more people get into it, and the more kind of novel ways we find to solve problems. One of the key bits of advice I guess I would give to anybody who wants to work in a technology role is to stay curious, is to stay close to the trends and shifts in the market. But I also would caution that with, don't believe the hype. But there's a lot of hype around the AI space at the moment, a lot of huge investments going into massive companies, right? And they may or may not come off either way, but at least staying close to what they're doing and how those tools and processes and different use cases that they're developing are going, I think is absolutely critical, because almost certainly there'll be adjacent cool stuff that can come off the back of other people's work, and you being close to that will give you a bit of a boost. So yeah, staying really, really keen to the way the industry's moving is one piece of advice I would give. Don't find yourself having that world pass you by and then being challenged with it later. I suppose the other one, and this is not necessarily advice, I think this is more just an approach, right, is question absolutely everything, right? Like, don't just accept the answer because. Double check it, triple check it, ask the right questions. I think being really inquisitive and almost critical in nature, particularly in automation, is pretty important, right? Because we're definitely in a place of moving physical objects around in the world, or manipulating certain things, especially if we're talking about humanoid robots, or sort of like in our world, we're picking and packing and stuff. Making sure that we're really challenging ourselves to ask all of the right questions so that we don't end up with a suboptimal solution later, or even a safety concern or some other thing, right?
Yeah. I guess this is the point in the podcast where I'd want to invite you to talk about anything that's close to your heart, anything that you think is important in robotics and automation, anything that doesn't get enough limelight, enough time in the spotlight, I guess.
So the first one actually it's going to sound a bit silly, but obviously given the context of who I work for, and I've spent 20 years of my life here, the future of shopping is definitely something that is buzzing around in my head. Now, I'm not an e-commerce person, so big disclaimer here. I'm not the person to go and talk about like behaviors online and things like that. I don't really know. But looking at technology as a whole, and obviously the growth of many companies coming out into the automation and robotics space, and the complementary nature of change within the software space, right? Like obviously with OpenAI and there's various large investments from Google and Meta and so on into agentic solutions. I am curious as to how that's going to play out over the long term, because it is a potential moment in time where we're going to see a foundational shift in online behavior, particularly in online shopping. And the use of agents to do things for you, any things. Actually, I also think about in the context of my own role and the products that I build and my teams build, because it's a whole new paradigm, right? The idea that you can almost outsource some elements of thinking to something else that can solve the problem for you hands off, basically, is quite interesting, right? But I don't know how that's going to play out over the long term. But as we see introductions of relationships between various large companies, you might see OpenAI working with, I think it's Stripe, on the e-commerce platform changes they're making there. That is an interesting moment in time. So that's something that I've spent a little bit of time thinking about how that might play out, and doing a bit of wargaming in my own mind to see whether what changes we might see in demographic behaviour. So that's probably one topic that sort of keeps me busy. But from a really important to me problem, and important to Ocado problem is from a leadership perspective, is more diversity in robotics and automation. So I am an advocate for our Women in Technology group. I spend a lot of time with many of our absolutely fantastic women technologists across many different roles, right? That could be product folks, user experience designers, automation experts, whether it's robotics or mechanical hardware, PLC development, those types of things. But it's pretty obvious. You can read the data. There's much less women in this space than there are men, and it's something that's quite important to me that we keep a spotlight on, because actually, there is fundamentally no reason why it should be the case. But I want to make sure that as a leader, a senior leader within Ocado, I'm doing everything I can to make sure we have the right environment for anybody to come and work in Ocado. So that's something that I've spent a lot of time that is very dear to me, and I know to a lot of my colleagues. But me as a leader, my job is ultimately to try and create an environment that's completely inclusive and encourages people to come and have a fantastic time working in a great company.
Especially like a safe space, I guess, from especially for women in engineering. I think it's so key to highlight and be an advocate for women in engineering, because it is such an intimidating place to look at an industry and think, this is so male dominated.
That's right.
And then have your opinion valued, which I think is crazy that we even have to have that conversation. But again, I think it's really important to highlight there that women in engineering are so crucial. I guess to move on to the skill sets that are going to really future-proof the industry, which ones are going to be important moving forward, which ones are going to matter, where should these kids be spending their time looking at for the discipline side in skill sets, particularly with engineering?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge question, right? As again, comes back to my point around the shifts in technology in recent times. I mean, you might argue that many years ago, people would spend a lot more time learning how, very foundational parts of computer science work. In this modern day, where we'll have a lot more frameworks kind of abstracting away a lot of the complexity and, taking away a load of tagging and other stuff that we used to have to do, it becomes easier for us to focus more on the business outcome, right? Easier to focus on what's the actual problem I'm trying to solve, and less on the nitty gritty of putting some stuff together to try and even prove the thing could even work in the first place. I have no idea how that's likely to evolve over time, but I can only imagine based on historical trends that it's going to continue to get easier and easier to do things, right? I personally spend a bit of time, trying to use some of the new cool tools out there, trying to do a bit of a no-code, bit of a thing, what can I do without actually writing any code? And, you find that you can do quite a lot actually not writing code, but there obviously are quite a lot of limitations as well. So I would definitely say, still learning the basics and the foundations are absolutely necessary.
And very difficult as well. I tried to teach myself how to code for 45 minutes on ChatGPT and gave up because it's so difficult.
And obviously it can also lead you in the wrong direction, right? It can probably, if you're not learning the foundations, you might pick up some pretty terrible habits, which frankly will get kicked out of you fairly quickly in the work environment, right? Because good engineers with lots of experience can quite quickly smell a rat before it becomes a big problem, right? And we definitely don't want lots of new junior engineers coming into the industry who basically need to be retaught how to approach problems in the right way. But at the same time, to ignore progress would be also quite silly. I think it's a bit of a follow along with the journey and see what you can learn from it and see what you can leverage from it. But I do think, really making sure that the foundations and the basics of how to think clearly about engineering problems is still as necessary today as it was 25, 30 years ago. Because it's the skill set, it's the mindset, it's how you approach problems, right? And then if you can have that skill set and mindset and then just use the cool new tool to do it 10 times faster, well, that's amazing, right? That's just all upside. So yeah, I think it's a big unknown to sort of come back to the question as to where we'll end up in some years' time. But I would recommend that we still encourage our up-and-comers to understand the basics, right? To really understand the foundations of how software systems are built and how machine learning models and foundational models are constructed and how, what good looks like from a mechanical design perspective, those types of things, I just think are still as critical today as they'll ever be. But they'll be used in a different way. They'll be used as is this actually good? Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Again, brings in that skepticism. I guess, do you ever struggle to find those golden candidates?
I don't think struggle is the right word. I think, sometimes you might be looking for someone who's a bit niche, right? And there might be a certain particular mindset, skill set, or something that you just don't have within your organization that you're not really set up to find. And there have been, obviously, occasions in Ocado's history where we're doing something completely brand new, something we've never done before. It might have been we needed somebody who knew something about reinforcement learning before that was something that now everybody knows about, but once upon a time, nobody did. And so finding specialists in that way, but obviously we find that there is generally a lot of interest in what we do because it's the coolest train set in the world. Yeah. It is a very, very cool place to work, and you can very quickly find a place for you in a technology environment in a company like Ocado. But the specialisms tend to be the ones that come through active search, right? Having to say, I need somebody who's qualified in this one thing. Mm-hmm. And that obviously then tends to need the helps of people like yourself.
I guess my next question really is focusing a bit more on product with so many touch points between controls, system, hardware, software. How do you measure product success?
It's something that I do a lot of. We build complex systems. We can think about each individual item within our platform as a single product in of itself, but the fundamentals are we sell a platform, right? And the platform is an ecosystem of many, many, many things. But ultimately, the way that we think about success for our partners is ultimately about the outcomes that they're trying to achieve in their business, right? So their outcomes, it depends where they are, but territorially, and with some of the challenges they might have, whether it's cost of land, cost of labor, blah, 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 blah. But we can quite easily measure the outcome because we can look at the macro. But when we then filter in, you can look at causation, right? Like what's causing the outcome? It's, well, this particular thing is performing better than expected or worse than expected. And so for us, when we look at the whole system, we essentially break it down into metrics for each of the processes that exist, all the way down to the smallest little thing that happens, which might just be a scanner scanning something. But they all relate to each other, and there's a big metric tree that kind of brings it all together to say, well, if this needs to go at least this fast, in order for this thing to be able to go at least this fast. And so you can piece it all together to say the system needs to perform at this rate. And you can follow the tree all the way from the top, all the way to the bottom and back up again and see where the problem is. So I think it's actually, it is complex in nature, but actually if you think about it as a causation of different things that are going on within your system, and the flow rate, if you like, to use an analogy, the flow of those systems needing to be at a certain speed in order for the entire system to perform, then it's actually quite easy to build a mental model around our solution. Yeah.
Almost kind of like break it down to smaller systems.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
Yeah.
Perfect. I guess I'd like to zoom out a little bit more on the industry. Do you think there's any misconceptions or misunderstandings from the general public about robotics and automation?
That's a good question. I mean, if somebody says robotics to somebody who doesn't work in robotics, my guess is they probably jump to some like Will Smith movie or the Tesla bot or some other, it is a good movie. But I imagine they think about humanoid robots, right? It's probably what 90% of people would imagine. Terminator. I mean, one of the greatest films ever, in my opinion. So yeah, I think the misconception probably is that we're all spending time trying to build humans and replace humans, and I'm not sure that's really what's actually going on in the industry, right? I think robotics is a vast opportunity, but tends to be, in my opinion, specializing on certain use cases, because it's actually much easier to solve one problem than it is to solve 500 problems with one thing. So even just last year I went to Modex, which is obviously an industry event where we see a lot of cool new stuff that companies are building to solve particular problems. They tend to focus on logistics-related problems in those types of environments, moving stuff, picking stuff up, putting stuff down. You don't see very many humanoid robots in that environment. So I think that is a bit of a misconception, is that people who work in robotics are just working on human stuff. Yeah. That's probably not the case.
I think it's because of the hype at the moment and everything that's seen online. There's a lot of kind of, I don't want to call it propaganda, but it almost is, where everything is tailored towards the development of humanoids and not enough focus on what the actual core of robotics is. And it is automation at the end of the day. It's doing something without human involvement. And I think...
Or collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so many use cases for robotics, like you say, and tailoring it to one kind of use case with a humanoid. But again, solving one problem with one thing instead of...
A hammer's still good at banging in nails into a piece of wood, right? It's basically that kind of thing. It's a tool for the job. But then that doesn't mean we shouldn't be curious about, more general use cases. And I know a lot of these larger AI companies that are focused really heavily on, trying to get to human level intelligence and things like that. These are all, really interesting, academically interesting and, maybe philosophically interesting problems. They're not necessarily problems I particularly care too much for, because ultimately they're not going to be the things that help me solve the problems that our company has or our industry has, right? It's usually very specific things like picking something up very accurately, not dropping it, placing it exactly where it needs to go.
I do think one of the really good things about that humanoid hype is the focus that it has on the market. So it's obviously still robotics, it's still automation, and any focus on the industry is good focus.
Absolutely.
And more capital that's poured into the industry, the bigger the industry is going to get. So I do think it does have that use case in itself. But again, I completely agree with you on that front. I guess I'd like you to, in your own words, for anyone that's listening to the podcast at the moment, explain why you think someone should consider a career in the industry today. What's so exciting about it for Steve?
It's so early, and it's it's a nascent thing, and so who knows where it's going to be in 15 years. But I think one thing's pretty clear to me is this is a growing opportunity for technology to transform the way we live. It doesn't matter what environment we're thinking about here. Almost any environment is up for some form of support for how humans live their lives. Whether it be grocery shopping in my case and making that as easy as possible and as toil-free as possible, whether it's medical support for people who have medical needs, you name it, I could keep going on. I just think it's a thing that is inevitable, and to be involved in making it a force for good, to better the outcomes for future generations, what's not to love? And then on the other side of that, it is it's quite fun to play with robots.
Yeah. I guess that kind of being so early in the industry as well, like if you want to ride the wave, you've got to grab your surfboard kind of mentality as well. Yeah. I guess to kind of finish up, I want to work out what kind of people and skill sets you're looking for now and in the future as Ocado moves forward and scales.
Yeah, I think I might have given it away a little bit with some of the things I've said around like critical mindedness and being open to critique and things like that. You know, I look for razor sharp people, right? People who have got really sharp focus, clear engine inside, right? Really bright folks, particularly for engineering and robotics type roles. For product type roles, you're obviously looking for people who are quite strategic, quite visionary, and they can sort of imagine a world where. Yeah. And those types of people, you know, are fantastic because they challenge our engineers then to imagine that world where and what are the blockers and what's the potential path to get there. So I think it is about that, like, you know, really sharp critical mind for our engineers, the ones who can kind of be really objective, open to criticism, open to feedback, work really well with their peers, and essentially become stronger as a group because they're so open with each other and so collaborative. Mm-hmm. So I tend to start with that. I tend to start with more around the person and their approach, less around, for example, their qualifications, the university, blah, 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 which actually is really not that interesting. Yeah. Obviously, there's an amount of capability that everyone will need to have in an engineering role, but ultimately you've got to have the right attitude. You've got to come to work in the right way. You've got to be like I said before, obsessed about the problem. Yeah. The solution will get you there, but focus on the problem. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, that strategic, visionary aspect, I think that's what drives successful companies forward, right? Because they come with something else. They come with just a different perspective. Somebody's going to challenge me and say, Steve, I think that's the wrong answer. We need to look over there, and they'll turn your head. And if they're compelling enough to turn your head and then prove it, you know, really interesting people, and you can, you know, hard to find, but they are out there.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I think it paints a really good picture on what the Ocado tech person actually looks like. And I think that's something that businesses struggle really hard to hold on to as they grow. So it's commendable that you do hold on to that with the size that Ocado Tech is at now. I guess to finalise, Steve, what I want to do is obviously thank you for your time, explaining your journey in robotics and automation and sharing your insights, your story, how you got to where you are, what you did along the way. I think it's really, really inspiring and insightful to these kids and these young people in engineering that are looking to move themselves forward in the same way. So again, thanks for your time, mate.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve.